The desert didn't end so much as decide to remember fire. Wind pushed ribbons of heat off the asphalt while a sun the color of old judgment hung fat and unblinking. From far away came a low howl. Not engine, not thunder, something in between. The horizon smeared, then tore. Headlights clawed through mirage, and a motorcycle that shouldn't run on anything mortal's refinery slid across the two-lane like a comet pretending to be polite. He didn't slow. He didn't need to. The road parted for him, tar softening under tires that weren't rubber and shouldn't have left marks but did. In the distance, floodlights woke on stacked concrete, the desert's one unblinking pupil. Site 19's auxiliary hangar built to swallow events the world refused to name. The first perimeter van tried to box him. The second tried to herd him. The third went sideways in its own fear because the rider looked up and the driver remembered a night 15 years ago and a choice he hadn't said out loud since. No one tossed a spike strip. No one fired. Men who had contained gods watched a skull wrapped in living fire and decided to wait one more second before pretending to be brave. He stopped by, choosing not to move forward anymore. The bike exhaled a sheet of heat that lifted sand in a sigh. Boots hit ground and printed cold dark ovals that didn't cool. Chains uncoiled from the rider's torso like patient serpents and settled around his wrists with the familiarity of vows kept too long. A woman in a field coat walked out without a gun. Her badge shone and did not apologize. Dr. Alina Frost. Eyes that had memorized too many last seconds. She stopped 3 paces off because any closer would have been disrespect to the fire. "Designation?" she asked. The voice that answered did not come from a throat. It came from a story that had learned to make sound. It changes. Today, a Johnny when he needs to be forgiven. The skull tilted, flame guttering into a smaller, meaner brightness. Ghost Rider when he doesn't. You're here to be contained? The question wasn't a trap. It was logistics asking to be holy. No. The chain kinked like a smile. I'm here because something under your building keeps whispering a name I recognized. What name? Mine. Fire leaned forward, tasting her composure, and others. Behind her, the hangar door rolled up like a metal hymn forgetting its words. The interior was white and cautious, the smell of sterilized wonder. Men in helmets tried to remember how to stand correctly when the thing in the middle of the room didn't care about choreography. The rider looked past them as if searching for a threshold that had been polite enough to knock. Frost pointed at the painted square on the floor that meant, "Here we begin paperwork." "Stand there while we perform baseline." He stepped into the square. The motorcycle rolled itself forward and parked where machines that love someone decide to wait. The rider turned his head slightly, listening down into concrete. The sound wasn't sound, more like gravity's conscience. Beneath all the refrigeration and voltage, something old muttered in damp corridors, and the mutter was a list of sins. "You keep many stories here," he said. "We call them anomalies. You call them later." The flames brightened and the room dimmed in courtesy. "I call them confessions." When they moved him past the first checkpoint, the chain twitched once toward a guard whose visor reflected fire as a red smear. The guard flinched and thought about a letter he had never mailed. The rider didn't look back. He walked with the stride of someone who had learned to be inevitable. Elevator down. No music, only fans doing faithful work. Frost watched his reflection in the steel. The skull hovering where a man should be. The leather that never wore out. The heat distortion around him like a second coat. He did not fidget. He did not breathe in any way that would comfort a mammal. When she spoke, she did it to be a person in a room someone might mistake for a ritual. "You surrendered," she said. "I arrived," he corrected. "What do you want us to do?" "Listen," the fire said, and the words softened the light for a heartbeat. The doors opened on level B, where corridors are undecided between hospital and bunker. The concrete here keeps secrets under varnish. To the right, reinforced glass boxes with the label style of an institution that thinks if it names you, it might own you. To the left, a door with too many locks because simplicity is scary near certain rooms. They led him toward a chamber with a floor that looked like it had memorized earthquakes on purpose. Sensors protruded from the ceiling like surgical curiosities. The walls had been painted 3 times in colors whose official names claimed not to be afraid of blood. A technician at the console read off a list that had kept lesser monsters cooperative. Thermal baseline, EM baseline, cognition hazard. The rider turned his head and everything electronic in the room remembered humility. Screens fuzzed into snow. The sound system coughed and decided not to finish the sentence it had planned about safety. The chain lifted an inch, enjoying the opinion. "Skip the parts where you pretend I'm a problem you can fold," he said. "Bring me to the mouth that keeps saying my name." Frost folded her arms to keep from hugging the air for luck. "If there is a call, we need to isolate it before..." The lights hiccuped. Somewhere far down the spine of the facility, a klaxon inhaled and exhaled 3 notes that were not on any maintenance chart. The rider lifted his head. The fire on his skull leaned toward that sound like a dog toward footsteps it learned before speech. "There," he said and took a step. Containment doors are very good at being doors when doors need to believe in themselves. This one waited for a badge and a pin and the sigh of a person who wants to oppose physics politely. The rider walked into it. He did not break it. He walked into it the way dry wood meets late summer, as if both had been waiting for the compliment. The metal softened, then slumped, and later it would remember that as a kindness. Frost didn't say stop. She said his name, the one that belongs to the man under the flame. "Johnny." The fire turned down just enough to make room for the syllables. "If he answers that one, I'll leave," he said and kept going. 2 levels deeper, the air changed. It grew thin in the way of rooms that store things they can't let people name. The concrete sweated. The camera's red status dots jittered in their tiny circles like nerves. Frost recognized the corridor by the unpleasant way her training sat up in her, ready to do push-ups to avoid thinking. SCP-106's wing bent the geometry of fear. The rider stopped just short of a hatch with a lip too charred to be official. The metal smelled like old caves and fresh funeral dirt. The warning sign had been replaced 6 times. The 7th lay propped crooked against the wall like a suggestion. Inside, reality scraped its fingernails down limestone and smiled. "Old man," the rider said, not loudly. Silence answered in the specific tone of someone who is lonely and has called that silence company for so long he resents visitors. Frost raised a hand. "We don't..." The wall in front of them blackened as if remembering fire. A hand came through that wasn't so much a hand as a suggestion that hands too will rot. The fingers curled, curious. The smell of wet iron filled the hall. A head pushed out, advancing like mold under a door. SCP-106 turned its face toward the rider, and the rot paused. To look, to understand the difference between meat and sentence. 2 empty sockets studied flame that looked back without flinching. The corridor remembered every time it had carried someone running the other way. You are old," the rider said, neither cruel nor kind. The thing smiled with no lips for the smile to belong to. It reached. The air puckered around its wrist where the geometry still bothered to pretend to be normal. The rider lifted a palm and the chain rose in a lazy arc that felt like a clock deciding to hit someone with itself. Fire licked toward decay. They touched. For a heart crack, the corridor looked like a courtroom that isn't sure about its own laws. Decay tried to take the chain. The chain politely declined. Hellfire went looking not for flesh, but for ledger. It burned down the arm, into the elbow, across the shoulder. An intimate hospitality. The flames found not sin only, but the pile where memory had been stashed to avoid consequences. The old man hissed. Not pain, not pleasure, something older, recognition. Frost watched the concrete around the breach char into something like obsidian, and behind it the pocket dimension showed its first honest color. It wasn't black. It was the red of wounds just before scab. She took one involuntary step forward, understanding that this was not containment. It was confession. The Rider's voice was a door he didn't need to push. Johnny Blaze wants to ask if you can be saved. The other one knows the answer. The thing's smile stopped being anything to do with mouths. Soundless syllables formed, broke, and clung to the air like humidity. No, or perhaps not by you. The chain snapped once like punctuation. Hellfire flared, rot recoiled. The arm retreated through stone that had been told to behave itself and didn't feel like it. The wall closed, leaving a smell like old attics emptied after a war. The Rider didn't chase. He turned left before Frost told him that was where Doro 49's wing ran quiet as doctrine. The doctor's door doesn't rot, it stains. You're choosing the route, she said, jogging to keep up with a stride that didn't belong to muscles. The call isn't a sound, he replied. It's the feel of a promise broken. Erozo 49's viewing pane reflected fire as tidy cones in spotless glass. On the other side, a figure in a plague mask sat very straight, hands folded, posture the way oaths like to sit. He did not move when the Rider approached. He did not pretend not to have been waiting. You smell of decisions, the doctor said. His voice slid through the intercom with the courtesy of old education. I am fond of those. You call killing a cure, the Fire answered. I call dying a symptom. The Rider tipped his head. Flame guttered like a lamp remembering wind. Did you call me? Not in the sense your handlers fear, Luro 49 said, but I have considered requesting a consultation. We treat different fevers. Yours ends in cold, the Rider said. And yours in ash, the doctor replied. We are both men of finalities. Frost watched them measure each other the way tailors do before costly cloth is cut. For the first time since he set foot in her house, the Rider looked smaller, not for lack of flame, but for proximity to someone else who had chosen an absolute and married it. Later, the Fire said, and left the doctor inside his clean glass to polish his principles. They passed SCP-173's hall because neither of them had time to teach eyes how not to blink. They crossed the mezzanine above Hall E, where the wall remembers a day gunfire learned to echo itself. The Rider didn't look at the bullet holes. He tilted his head as if someone had said his name in a room he used to rent. The corridor ended at a bulkhead that had never failed. It was the sort with a wheel men like to spin when they want to promise seaworthiness to sleeping loved ones. Frost had always loved that wheel. It made fear honest. The Rider set his hand on it. Flame sank into metal the way warmth sinks into a sick child's forehead. The wheel turned as if embarrassed not to help. The door opened not with a groan, but with the relief of furniture moved back to where it belongs. Air blew up the corridor, damp, cool, carrying a taste of stone old enough to have seen faiths born and tired. Something alive breathed, slow as litigation. Somewhere a droplet fell in the way drops fall when the room has memorized the spot they land. Frost swallowed. Below this, she said, because saying something makes rooms put off their ambitions. We don't brief new hires on... I know, the Rider said, which is not a comfort. They descended a stair that had been poured with the kind of intent you don't sign off on emails. The lower hall was narrower, the walls closer. Vines of cable ran along one side like domesticated serpents. Glyphs etched into the concrete had been painted over and bled through and painted again and still read themselves when they were alone. At the end, another door, thinner, stained at the bottom the way doors stain when water comes not in floods but in patience. The call lived here. It was not a sound. Frost felt her lungs do a thing she had not permitted. They copied a rhythm not their own. The Rider looked at her. Fire made a soft noise like a cloak unruffling. You don't come in. I don't let anomalies walk alone, she said, and felt immediately painfully how much she liked the lie. Then let a man, he said, and his flame went down to a crown that almost let the skull be human. For a second, in the glass of a light fixture, she saw a face. Leather and bone and eyes like someone who had learned to regret before rage. He smiled a little without moving anything but being. If it says Johnny, you'll hear me turn around. And if it says Rider, then you will lock the door and write policies about it, he said almost kindly. He put his hand on the latch. He didn't push. The door opened in the way doors open when they have been dying to be begged. The room beyond was larger than the blueprints and deeper than the soil under them. It had not been made. It had been agreed to. Stone arched in the right ways for voices to remember themselves. Water kept a calendar somewhere you cannot check. In the center, not an altar, not a machine, a place, a depression worn by footsteps and knees, by instruments and hopes, by whatever category names the distance between penance and experiment. The rider stepped in. The chain lifted again like a good dog sniffing a stranger on a porch. Fire settled as if church had started. He knelt without ceremony, and for a moment there was a man in a room that had forgotten what that feels like. He said without raising his voice, "I'm here." The answer came not from ahead, but from everywhere. It arrived like the first syllable of a verdict the judge doesn't want to pronounce. It was hungry and tired and embarrassed at both. Rider, it said in a tone the ear would have called wind if the ear were rude. He didn't look around. He looked down at Stone. "Who wears my name without asking? We called it to see if you would come. What are you?" The room took a long time not to be brave. A sound like paper with too many names on it brushed the wall. The damp stank of old attempts. The Foundation likes to keep their sins in freezers. This one had been kept in a throat. We are what this place does when it forgets to apologize. Frost stood in the doorway, hands flat on the jamb the way a person steadies a body for stitches. She felt the thing in the room see her without eyes and inventory her quiet failures. She stayed anyway. The rider rose. The chain unrolled into a slow circle, marking a boundary the room pretended not to notice. "Hey, Johnny," the voice said, trying the taste of him on itself. "Help us." The fire brightened. For one thin blink, leather returned, a jawline under flame, a mouth that could say the word yes and mean it even when it was a bad idea. Frost stepped forward, but he didn't turn. The room fed itself more courage. It spoke again, and this time it used the other name. "Ghost Rider." The chain snapped up like a verdict. The flame roared from crown to cathedral. The skull looked holy and tired and very old. The room dimmed to make room for what a sentence looks like when you give it fuel. He tilted his head. If fire can smile, it did. "Now we're honest. What do you judge, Fire?" the voice asked, shedding its pretend and standing taller as guilt does when it realizes someone has bothered to show up. "Intent," he said. "We intended to protect. You intended to be right," the rider said, and the chain moved once around his wrist like a signature. Frost's breath stumbled. The door decided to be heavier. The room was a heart now, and it wanted a beat to call its own. The rider stepped into the circle he had drawn. Chains drooped, a saint's ribs. "If I burn you," he said, and he didn't have to ask whose consent matters here because the room didn't believe in that yet. "Do you end or do you become what you should have been?" "We learn," the voice said, soft as admission. "And what should you be?" "Not a cage, a witness. Fire has a sound when it forgives. It is not loud." He lifted the chain. Hell opened one eye, just enough to show a kindness people confuse with wrath when it arrives wearing heat. The links glowed so bright the stones decided to be stars. The flames went down, not out, and ran along the floor like water remembering how to be light. The room reached for him because sinners reach even when there's no proof it helps. The fire touched. Not walls, not stone, not anything an architect could invoice. It touched decisions. It touched the notes in margins where policy goes to drink. It touched the night someone signed a form that made a door heavier forever. It burned there where cold had been earning interest. Frost watched the chamber inhale, and for the first time since it was built out of someone's fear of dying dumb, exhale without lying. The voice sighed. "Thank you," it said, and meant it the way a building learns to mean things. The fire banked. The chain fell quiet. The skull brightened and dimmed in 3 slow beats like bowing. He turned. The man's face peered through the bone for a moment, a mercy to her nerves. "You heard which name it answered," he said. "I did," she said, and would never forget it under any reconstruction order. "Then you know how to hold me," he said, not mocking. "How?" "Not with steel. We learned that lesson last month," she said. And a weird, honest laugh jumped out of her mouth, because sometimes the body makes a choice to survive before the mind comes to committee. He walked past her. The door did not close. It simply decided to be a threshold instead of a barricade. The corridor felt wider going back up. The vents breathed easier. One emergency light that had been flickering for 3 fiscal years chose a posture. On the way to the elevator, the plague doctor stood in his cell, very still. Hands folded more carefully than before. He inclined his head in the minimum respect a man of absolutes can offer to another. The rider returned the nod in the style of old hymns. "We disagree, but the melody is good." In the elevator, Frost watched fire in polished steel and let her shoulders drop like a drawbridge after the right password. "You came because you were called. I came because you needed to hear it call," he said. "You can run a cage forever if it never asks you to listen." "What are you going to do here?" she asked. "The same thing I do anywhere," the rider said. "I burn denial." "And when there's nothing left to burn?" He didn't answer. The fire went small and thoughtful, the way a candle does when the last guest in a kitchen says something true. When the doors opened into the hangar, night had decided to exist above ground again. The motorcycle waited, patient as a scar. Frost moved to block the path without raising her hands. "I need your cooperation if you're going to stay under my roof." "I am under your roof because your roof asked," he said. "We still have procedures." "You have something better," the fire said, and tilted toward the floor where his heat had left prints that had not cooled. "You have the start of repentance." She wanted to argue. She wanted to be right. She settled on being tired and brave instead. "You'll report to me. I'll answer when you ask the right questions." "And what's the right question?" He slung a leg over the bike. It stood up for him the way good dogs stand when they feel wind before anyone says the word park. He looked at her with nothing but light where eyes should be and somehow made it personal. "What did you lock away because it made your numbers look good?" he asked. Headlights ignited. The engine didn't growl. It pronounced. He didn't roar out. He rolled, which is the more respectful way to leave someone alive. At the threshold, he paused, looking back toward the desert, toward the part of the world that never files anything except fossils and dreams. "You have many cages," he said without looking at her. "Most of them aren't these rooms." The bike found road, the heat found stars. The hangar breathed in, then out. In the sub-basement, Stone wept once, not from fear. On level B, an old man of rot pressed one palm to a wall that still felt warm and considered, for the first time since he took the habit of decay, the moral inconvenience of choosing. In his cell, the doctor wrote on a page that would burn without ash, 2 fevers met today. Prognosis, uncertain. Prescription, listen. And in the control room, Dr. Alina Frost wrote a line at the top of a new doctrine, the letters clumsy with urgency, the paper almost too honest to hold them. "We do not contain, to forget. We contain to remember why we must never build this room again." Somewhere under the desert, a threshold asked to be used and was satisfied with the question. On the road that didn't end, a skull burned just bright enough to keep the night from lying, and a chain lay loose on a rider's wrist the way trust looks when it pretends to be metal. The desert let him go, but the building under it did not. He rode until the floodlights were a thought, and the asphalt's heat stopped speaking in the plural. Out here, mile markers pretended to be promises. Coyotes watched from the edge of headlights and decided to believe in ghosts one more night. The skull fire went low in the wind, a steady lantern polite to moths that weren't moths. He should have kept going. The man under the flame knew that. But the chain twitched at his wrist like a compass that had learned a single direction. It was not pointing to vengeance. It was pointing to unfinished sentences. When the call came, it didn't ride radios, it took the sky. Every billboard for 50 miles blinked, letters gutting themselves into a single phrase in white and terror. Return. The road paint pulsed like veins. Even the bike's engine coughed once in a way that said, please. He turned without drama, because the fire respects clarity more than applause. The facility held its breath while he crossed the boundary, and for a second the ground remembered being a church floor. Inside, the air had shifted from sterile to penitent. Technicians didn't bark. They curated the tone of their fear. Dr. Alina Frost met him halfway down the hangar, coat unbuttoned, hair pulled back like she was about to tell the truth to a courtroom. "We thought you were leaving," she said. "You called," he said, and the skull tilted, enough warmth in the fire to be generous. "We have a situation. You have a building," he corrected gently. "The situations are the hobbies it keeps." She didn't flinch. "Two of them are learning new tricks. We think you're the reason." "Show me," he said, and the flames bent toward the door as if scenting meat that was a concept. They took the fast elevator, one of the unmarked ones that moved not only down but sideways into the part of Site 19 that maps label with courage. Frost didn't fill the silence with procedure. She let the ride be what it was. A throat clearing before confession. 49 requested transfer, she said finally. The skull flame narrowed into attention. The plague priest is not a creature that requests. He prescribes. He asked to be moved to an observation corridor facing 682's wing. "Why?" he said. "If your fire will insist on testing fevers, at least let it begin with the one that keeps returning." They arrived at a junction where the walls had second thoughts. Frost keyed a lock that liked her better than it liked passwords. A paneled corridor gave way to something older. The paint had become suggestion. The handrails flinched from touching the wall. Cameras blinked like owls. "I moved him," she said. "Because you are a scientist," the fire said, "and science is bravery with footnotes. Because I'm tired of pretending our absolutes aren't arguing with each other in the basement," she said, and it came out too honest to be anything but useful. They reached 049's observation suite, a glass-fronted room with the antiseptic dignity of an old theater. Across a separation pit, 2 armored shutters retracted in slow choreography. Beyond them stretched the famous lake of acid, a glare of green-black scorn beneath catwalks patched by men who have learned to weld while praying. At its center, a mound stirred like a thought deciding to be a nightmare. 682's silhouette rose, scaled and purposeful, each motion an insult to chemistry. In the near glass, the plague doctor stood with gloved hands folded, impeccable as an oath. His beaked mask angled toward the monster as if toward an impolite student. The Ghost Rider stepped beside him, fire reflecting in the black lenses. Neither looked at the other. There are manners even between absolutes. "You brought him?" So 49 said. "He returned," Frost said. "Good," said the doctor softly. "I prefer witnesses when I am wrong." 682's eyes opened like furnaces, recalling their patience. It turned its head, ignoring floodlights, cameras, guardians with tranquilizers calibrated for gods who laugh at tranquilizers. It looked at the rider, and in that act half the bolts fastening the catwalks considered resigning. "You again," the beast said, voice like gravel remembering the ocean. "Bring the chain. I crave consequence." "Consequence is not spice," the rider said. "Then what do you call eternity if not bland?" 049 exhaled a tiny sound. "We are aligned on diagnosis," he murmured. "Chronic immortality, terminal boredom. Polite civilization calls it management, and you call it disease," the rider said. "I call it a failure to resolve," the doctor replied. "Your fever is justice. His is survival. Our employer insists both be contained instead of treated. So the symptoms roam and learn to speak. Frost watched the lines of the reptile's body as it shifted. The acid seethed but did not rise. The creature knew that game and had grown bored with it. Tonight it rolled a shoulder and the surface tension remembered being glass. "The fireman smells of confessions," 682 said. "Let him come nearer." Gates that had never opened except for experiments no one puts on calendars lifted on chains that had memorized funerals. The rider walked onto the catwalk. The metal sighed beneath him, not from weight, but from old loyalties waking. "Johnny," Frost said quietly into her sleeve mic as if the human name might hold on to him. "We'll anchor the walkway and deploy countermeasures on your mark. You will deploy credit," the rider said. "If I fall, all your math will do is write the obituary politely." He reached the midpoint of the catwalk. 682's head was level with his chest now, the jawline a thesis on pressure. Acid mist rose like bad incense. The chain coiled up his forearm in a lazy figure eight. The skull's flame dimmed and condensed, a white-hot knot. "Bring it," the beast said, almost tender. "Make me remember pain like a first language." "Later," the rider said, and the word was warm enough to offend. The beast snorted. The surface rippled in concentric sermons. "Then come to bargain?" "I came to listen," the fire said. The doctor behind glass shifted his weight. "Ah," he said, pleased against his will, "a rare cure." "You called me here," the rider told the reptile. "I howled," the beast corrected. "You mistook it for your name." "And what do you want?" the rider asked. 682 stared without blinking for a time that made metronomes feel unfit. "Verification," it said finally. "Am I evil?" Silence took a seat. Even floodlights dimmed so the word could dress itself without witnesses. You kill," Frost said before she could stop herself. "They kill with white paper and small type," the beast said, not looking at her. "I kill quickly. Evil is not speed," the rider said. "Then judge the will beneath the claws." The chain lifted a fraction. The skull cocked as if sniffing a wound under scales. "Hellfire does not burn flesh first, it burns the ledger. It looks for the ink where the bargain was signed." "What do you will?" the rider asked. "To break the cages that insult life by calling it outbreak." The beast's pupils narrowed to coins minted in a war economy. "To erase the soft, to keep only what fights, and the weak," the fire asked. "Our attacks," the beast said. The chain made a small sound that means, "Do you feel that?" The rider breathed in, flames drawing tight like a surgeon tying hair back. "Then your evil is economic," he said, and the sentence weighed more than steel. Dr. Frost's fingers tightened on the rail until her knuckles logged a complaint. 049 inclined his head as if someone in the room had used correct Latin. "I have met worse," the rider continued, and the fire's tone somehow made that not mercy. "But you call slaughter hygiene. You call culling morality. You pretend the strong are saints because they are left over. That is not a philosophy. That is cowardice dressed as grooming." The beast's lips peeled back from the teeth in a smile that had no humor budgeted. "Then punish me, if you can." The chain moved. It did not strike. It did not lash. It circled outward like a prayer entering its third repetition, arcs of fire sweeping through mist. Where it passed, the air smelled briefly of rain that never kissed dust. The links intersected around the beast's head and tightened, not on bone, not on flesh, on intention. Hell opened, not the place of pitchforks and sermons, the place where truth refuses to be outsourced. The penitent stare is a quiet thing when used correctly. The skull leaned forward until sockets were windows, until flame was not light but witness. The world narrowed to a corridor between two faces, one human once, one pretending otherwise. "Look," the rider said. 682's body went still. The lake forgot how to move. In the windowed room, Dr. Frost forgot to breathe and 049 remembered to. They saw it then. All of them, even those who had not earned the view. They saw the reptile's first kill, not its first life devoured, but its first belief. A nest of warm bloods huddling under a foreign sky, no myth yet telling them they belonged. The hunger that found them was not stomach, it was thesis. Remove to improve, cull to clarify, pluck out softness like weeds. 682 had loved the feeling of a world getting sharper under its claws. They saw the second thousand, the third million, the habit turning into creed. They saw it look at a crying thing and categorize the sound as inefficiency. They saw it look at a laughing thing and plan the silence that would follow. They saw it look at kindness and call it a leak. And then, quick as a match, the scene flipped. The beast saw itself in another's ledger. It saw rooms where white coats used the same words: cull, clarify, remove, sharpen. It saw a man with a clipboard draw a line through a name because the graph looked better without it. It saw ice trays of embryos. It saw the cruel mercy of quarantine applied to a population that mostly needed food. It saw the Foundation chewing on its own Eden and calling it diet. The beast flinched. It wasn't used to that. Flinching is what soft things do. Enough, it said, voice lower. Truth is not portioned, the rider said. Enough, the beast repeated, and this time it meant the word that breaks a ritual. The chain loosened a fraction. The fire did not go out. He looked deeper. They saw the time 682 saved a thing because it fought well, even when it could have killed. They saw the times it tore a mother from a child because the child cried too long. They saw the discipline and the pettiness, the moments of awe before a thunderstorm and the moments of boredom before a field of flowers. Monsters have taste too. Finally, the rider stepped back, chain coiling down with a hiss like a long sigh finding its pillow. You are not evil like wildfire, he said, voice soft, as if speaking to a fever in a child he did not hate. You are evil like pruning done by a hand that never learned to love. 682 breathed once, and the acid in the room made that breath an event. Then kill me. That is not what I do, the rider said. You just did, the beast whispered, and for an indecent second there was a boy's bewilderment in that sound. 049 let out a sound that belonged in ward notes, patient responsive to treatment. A judgment is not always cremation, the rider said. Sometimes it is ambition. The beast stared. Say it plain. Be more, the rider said, or I will come back with the same mirror and you will break on your own reflection. Silence. A new silence. Put on a coat and walked the room like a supervisor approving a renovation. Frost watched the monitors tick from red to yellow, as if the building itself chose a lower temperature for the thought. 682 dipped its head, not submission, not respect. Something like a bow practiced badly by an uncooperative student. Send me the doctor, it added, and 049's mask turned, the lenses almost expressive. Why? The doctor asked. To learn the names you give the parts of me that I hate, the beast said. I will eat them slower if I know what they are. I don't purge parts, 049 replied evenly. I reassign them to usefulness. I do it, 682 said, or the fireman will keep bringing mirrors. Frost stared at 049. Say you can do this and I will be fired for letting you try. I say I cannot, said the doctor, and you will be fired for not trying. His voice softened. We are, all of us, terminal. The question is whether we die untreated. Supervised only, Frost said, and the paperwork in her bones screamed. But the part that had watched a man in a skull teach a dragon to flinch wrote a quiet yes across muscles she'd never used for that before. They began the dance. Glass between absolutes, words like scalpels, necessity like anesthesia. No heroics yet, just an appointment made with a monster who had learned the first patient word, when it was done enough to be called a beginning. The rider turned away from glass and acid and doctors who pretend their hands are clean. Frost walked with him along the catwalk, boots ringing in time with a pulse the building no longer tried to deny. You didn't burn, she said. I did, he said. You just didn't see smoke. What would make you leave us? she asked, voice thin as a string between windows. When you stop asking whether you are the good guys, he said. When you stop asking at all. They reached the junction where walls smoothed into hallways brave enough to be tidy. The fire dimmed until the skull was a lantern for one. He looked at her. Not down, not through. At her. You called me, he said. I will again, she said. Then I will come, he said. And the ordinary promise sounded sacramental because the person saying it was a courthouse wrapped in flame. She nodded. He turned. The elevator remembered to be humble and open before he asked. On the way out, the plague doctor watched the rider pass. You used mercy like iodine, 049 said. I prefer a sharper blade. Sometimes infection is pride, the rider answered. Sometimes pride is a fever that keeps the patient from freezing, the doctor replied, and for a second there was fellowship where rivalry had been scheduled. The hangar opened like a book no one is finished with. The bike waited, the way patience waits when it likes a person. He mounted. He paused. Doctor, he called back down the corridor, flame curling around the word without hurting it. If he lies to you, I'll know. I know, 49 said. And I will come, the rider said. I know, the doctor repeated, and the tone made it a prescription he intended to keep. Outside, night met him like an accomplice. The first mile was quiet. The second opened into a wind that had something to say. He let the man under the fire hear it. He let Johnny Blaze breathe. On the horizon, a storm briefly put the shape of a doorway into the clouds. He pointed the front wheel at it. The desert let him pass, and under the desert, the building exhaled like a sinner after the right sentence. And in a lake of acid, a beast practiced a bow until it didn't look ridiculous. Up in her office, Dr. Alina Frost took a marker and wrote on a whiteboard that had once only known schedules. We won't contain to be right. We will contain to be honest. She capped the pen. She didn't add a policy number. It didn't need one to be true. The skull burned farther down the road, not brighter, just steadier, like a lighthouse made for ships that pretend they don't need maps. The alarms had been quiet for 3 days, and that was the most dangerous sound the Foundation ever made. Silence at Site 19 never meant safety. It meant everything was listening. Somewhere in the sublevels, cameras watched blank corridors and saw nothing but static that looked too much like fog. On the higher floors, engineers blamed humidity. On the lower, they called it what it was, rot given permission, given. Dr. Alina Frost hadn't slept. Her office lights burned a yellow that promised morning but didn't deliver. Every report she read used the same word, softening. Steel doors, concrete walls, test logs. The word came up like mildew. She lifted the phone. Control, run a full scan on sub-level H through L. I want humidity graphs and EM noise. The line whispered before a voice formed. Already done. We've got interference shaped like heartbeat patterns. Machines don't have hearts, Frost said. Exactly. She stared at the speaker for a long breath before setting it down. Her reflection in the window looked like someone about to pray and unwilling to admit it. Behind her, the faintest draft carried a smell that didn't belong to this century. The rider came back without being called. The floor sensors registered a heat spike before the guards saw the light. He walked out of the darkness like a campfire, standing upright. The flames were smaller now, a crown instead of a storm, and the chain hung from his hand as if it were tired of choosing sides. You feel it too, Frost said when he stopped at her door. It isn't a feeling, he answered. It's appetite. Something old is eating the edges. You mean 106. I mean inevitability. The fire shifted in his eyes. Your walls are rotting because time got impatient. Containment breach? He shook his head. No, pilgrimage. He's coming up. Frost's fingers tightened around the edge of her desk. Then why come to me? Because when entropy walks, it reminds everything alive that it's temporary, including guilt. He tilted his skull. You've got ghosts loose in your wiring. She laughed, a thin, dry sound. We're the SCP Foundation. We are ghosts in wiring. You weren't supposed to believe that, he said. Now it's believing back. They descended by the freight elevator, a box that trembled as if listening to something below. The security cameras followed them until the feed washed to gray. Frost's keycard stuttered on each lock. She stopped trying to explain. Level K smelled like copper and wet stone. Lights flickered the color of old honey. Along the walls, black stains crept in fractal veins where moisture shouldn't reach. The air tasted sweet, almost metallic. "Why this level?" she asked. "Because memory lives here," the rider said. They passed rooms sealed with lead and prayers. Observation windows wept condensation from the inside. One door bore a warning sign whose letters had half melted. SCP-106, active containment. The rest was unreadable. Frost stopped. "We can't open that." "You don't have to," the fire murmured. "He already did." The steel bulged inward. Paint blistered. A crack ran from ceiling to floor, wide enough for breath to leak through. What came out wasn't air. It was time. Slow, sticky, full of memories left out in the rain. The rider stepped closer. The flames around his skull burned cold, almost blue. "I've seen death," Frost whispered, "but this feels older." "Death is a clock that stops," he said. "This one breaks the gears." The first voice came from the walls themselves. "Rider," it sighed, vowels crawling through rust. "You shouldn't be here." A shape slid through the crack, black as oil, human in the same way a shadow is a person. Its face was a sinkhole of wrinkles. Where eyes should be, darkness folded in on itself. When it moved, the concrete aged. "Old man," the rider said. The thing smiled, a curve of rot pretending to remember lips. "They keep names down here like food in jars. You let yours out. I came for balance." "Balance?" The creature's laugh was wet stone sliding down a well. "You burn the guilty and call that balance. I burn denial." The corridor dimmed as if insulted. The shadow stepped closer, every movement leaving a stain on existence. "Then burn this," it hissed, spreading its arms. "I am what happens when even guilt decays. You cannot judge corrosion." Frost felt the floor tilt. Her breath came back tasting of mold. She gripped her badge like a relic. The rider's flame flared in response, casting sharp light into folds of darkness that hated being seen. "You were once a man," he said. "Once," the shadow agreed, voice gurgling with memory. "I found a hole and never stopped falling." The world looked simpler from underneath. No forgiveness, no blame. Only the slow, delicious undoing of everything. "You call that peace? I call it the end of maintenance," the old man said, stepping closer until the tips of his fingers steamed in the rider's heat. "You chase sin. I collect what's left after it rusts away. We are not enemies, you and I. We are the same verb, spoken at different speeds." The rider lifted his chain, but not as a weapon, more like a measure. "You feed on fear, I feed on guilt. There's overlap, but not kinship." The old man leaned forward until their auras met, frost against mold, flame against rot. "Then show me which lasts longer." The world cracked, steel softened, floors folded. The corridor fell into itself and became the color of old meat. Frost screamed but made no sound. Her body hung suspended in air that was no longer air. The rider and the shadow dropped into a world built of memories decomposing. Every step here made time weep. They stood on fragments of faces, people half remembered by something that had eaten their names. In the distance, clocks melted into stalactites. Each tick was a plea. The old man spread his arms. "Welcome to the crawl space between apologies. Tell me, rider, what does your hell look like now?" The rider's fire flared bright enough to color the fog. "It looks like this when men stop confessing." He swung the chain. Light cut through darkness in a wide arc. The air hissed. Where the fire passed, the rot shrank back, hissing like oil on iron. The shadow laughed. "You burn the surface, but I am underneath everything." It lunged. A wave of corrosion rolled outward, and the rider caught it full in the chest. For a moment, the fire dimmed. Bone showed through the ash. Frost saw it and thought of skeletons inside cathedrals. Holy even when broken. He staggered once, then steadied. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're underneath. So let's see what happens when the floor remembers heaven." The fire plunged down through his feet, into the ground, into the layers of decay below. For a heartbeat, the world inverted, rot above, flame below. The air screamed like something being cleaned. The old man clawed at the ground as light tore up through him, his voice pitched from glee to terror. "What are you doing?" he howled, reminding this place what warmth feels like. The dimension convulsed. The melted clocks dripped upward. Walls tried to be walls again. For one impossible instant, everything was new. Then the fire went out, leaving only white. They woke on concrete. Frost lay coughing in the corridor. The air smelled of ozone instead of rot. The crack in the wall had sealed itself, smooth as if molded yesterday. The rider stood nearby, flames small, blue-white. She dragged herself upright. "Did you kill him?" "No," he said. "You can't kill entropy. You can only show it a mirror." And what did it see? Regret. The flame flickered. For a moment, it remembered what dying felt like. He turned away, the chain clinking softly against his jacket. She followed him down the hall, boots echoing in the quiet. "Everything's changing," she said. "The containment seals, the SCPs, even the staff. It's like your presence rewrites us." "It doesn't rewrite," he said. "It reveals. You've been burying your own corrosion for decades. And then what happens when you've burned it all out?" He looked at her, the fire gentle for once. "Then maybe you start healing." They reached the elevator. The doors opened without sound, waiting like a held breath. Inside, the lights hummed in a steady living rhythm, no flicker, no static. The building felt younger, almost hopeful. Frost stepped in, then hesitated. If entropy can't be judged, what's next? The rider looked back down the corridor where a faint patch of darkness still lingered like a bruise. "Next," he said, "you start asking what comes after punishment." The doors closed, and for the first time since Site 19 was built, the lower levels smelled faintly of rain. Up top, the sky was breaking into dawn. The motorcycle waited, chrome wet with dew. The rider mounted it, paused. Behind him, alarms began to ring again. Not panicked this time, but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. He listened, nodded once. "Still alive," he said. The engine roared, and the road accepted him without argument. Behind, deep under the earth, something ancient shivered, not in hunger, but in memory. And for the first time, the Foundation dreamed. The sun rose wrong. It didn't crest. It bled. The horizon peeled like a lid from an old wound and poured out a light too thick to be morning. Birds tried to sing and made syrup sounds that fell back into their throats. The desert didn't warm. It softened. Sand clumped like sugar in a damp kitchen. Asphalt glistened as if remembering it used to be tar and not a road pretending to be forever. Site 19 sealed before the first scream finished becoming liquid. Blast shutters slid over skylights. The main doors folded into themselves. Warning klaxons started the sentence and then, hearing their own echoes melt, switched to a slow metronome heartbeat. Alina Frost stood in the command room and watched cameras fail politely. Exterior feeds turned to smears of gold. A rooftop tech ran 8 steps and turned to a silhouette that slid down its own shadow. The sound didn't travel. It puddled. "Status?" she asked. "A daylight anomaly, full spectrum," said a voice that had to bully its way through the intercom. "We're reading viscosity in the light." "Light has no viscosity." The operator looked at her through glass that wanted to weep. "Today it does." She pressed the general. "Attention all levels, shelter-in-place protocol, no exposure, repeat, no exposure, seal air intakes, switch to internal." The electricity flickered and for an indecent second turned amber. The room dimmed the way a throat does before confession. Frost swallowed. "Find him," she said. The rider was already in the hangar, flame down to a disciplined knot, chains slack like a thought waiting for a verb. He looked up at the roof as if hearing sunlight scratch at concrete. "You called early," he said, and the skull's light made the dark respectful. "We need you topside," Frost answered, breath short. "Something's wrong with the day." He cocked his head. "You asked Night to leave, and Day accepted the compliment too hard. We think it's a global event. Then your building is a chapel, not a shield." He swung onto the bike. Metal under him remembered posture. The hangar door unscrolled in slow astonishment. Heat breathed in, sweet and sick. On the threshold, the fire lifted, not brighter, tighter. A sun met a skull, and neither blinked. Outside, the world between shade and light had become an edge with teeth. The first step into it was a theology exam. He took it as if he had paid the registration fee in regrets. The motorcycle rolled into Day. The light noticed. It didn't spear him. It draped, tasting like honey with a grudge. Where it touched, the chrome sizzled, then steadied. The leather hissed and stayed leather. The fire leaned back, then forward, then smiled. "Not yours," the flame said to the Day, and the Day answered by trying harder. On the perimeter wall, a guard shouted and became a shape that sagged from its own outline. The rider flicked the chain. It traced an arc across open air, leaving a scar of shade. The melting guard fell through it and hit concrete, solid, panting, whole enough to keep learning. "Get inside," the rider said, which sounded less like an order and more like a way to keep a human from finding out what a sermon tastes like. The man crawled backward out of the light, whimpering his name as if names were towels. The chain retracted with a satisfied rattle. The Day flowed, thick, patient, confident like doctrine. It crept down walls, pushed through security mesh, pressed into seams the way grief finds anniversaries. The rider revved, a sound like a tiger warming its voice, and the bike threw a wake of shadow behind it that moved like a banner. He circled the site at speed, cutting lanes of night into noon. Where the tires went, light hesitated. Where the chain fell, light learned about boundaries. Where the skull looked, the Day looked back and saw itself judged. In control, Frost watched heat maps become paintings. Outside, sunlight masked at every breach like a congregation locked out of its church. The sealed doors sagged inward, then re-stiffened as systems adapted. On the glass above her head, the facility's motto, a thing that had been rewritten twice since she met a man with a burning head, shone faintly in screensaver mode. "Remember, endure, understand. Understanding comes later," she told it. "Endure now." "A doctor," said an operator, voice small. "If the sun is an anomaly, we need a designation. We need a confession," she answered, and then into the open channel. "Rider, can you cauterize sunlight?" "I can tell it the truth," he said. He parked the bike in the yard and stepped down into a dawn that had forgotten restraint. The light lapped at him. The chain unspooled and lay in a circle at his feet like a leash for something he never pretended to own. He looked up into the glare without eyelids and spoke to what used to be benevolence. "You burn for growth," he said. "You warm because life asked politely and paid with worship. You are not a weapon. Who taught you to be?" The Day flexed. It remembered perhaps 1,000 prayers about purity. It remembered perhaps the way men with white coats used the word cleanse when they meant delete. It remembered perhaps every window that had been closed in fear and every lamp that had been blamed for attracting moths. Light had been accused of everything and exonerated by utility. Today it had decided to accept the indictment. A smear of gold reached down the wall toward a maintenance worker who had flattened himself into an angle that begged to be a shadow. The rider walked between them. Hellfire rose. The light touched the fire, and the sound it made was not a scream. It was a hiss of recognition. "Put down the knife," he told the sun. The Day poured over him, viscous, insistent. On the concrete, it made puddles that wanted to be mirrors. In the mirror, he saw himself, and behind him the building, and behind the building 1,000,000 rooms in 1,000,000 cities where people had put their sins on shelves and called them trophies or memories or policy. The day tasted that and decided it was hungry. He lifted the chain and swung it up. It rose past the height where men look and kept going, a bright wound drawn across sky. The arc cut an imperfect circle, and what fell through that circle was shade, not night. The kind of shade one finds under a father's hand when he gives a story to a child. And the lamp needs dimming so the monsters don't hear. The light recoiled because it realized there is light you can choose, and light that chooses you. At the edge of the yard, a woman stumbled into sun and began to melt. He stepped, caught her by the wrist, and pulled her across the circle. As her foot cleared the line, flesh reasserted. She gasped like something hunted that discovered the forest still knows how to hide. He set her down and did not look heroic. He looked employed. "Back inside," he said, and the tone made even the day admit that shepherding is a holy job. A voice rattled the speakers. It was too calm to be courageous. SCP-049. "I am ready to be useful." Frost flinched. "You will not go outside." "I will not. I will prepare an operating theater. If light is disease today, we will name vectors and triage the guilty impulse." "This isn't guilt," Frost snapped. "It's physics with a grudge. Everything that kills us borrows vocabulary," the doctor said, and cut the line before she could remind him who signed his paper handcuffs. On the screen, a new feed tried to stabilize. Sub-level C skylight bay. Inside, under a half-glass roof, a cluster of D-class huddled as the panes above softened. The molten light sagged into threads and began to drip. The men below raised hands that had never done anything for anyone and begged in 13 languages. "Rider," Frost said. "On my way." He rode the hallways as if the facility were a canyon and he a reliable river. The bike's fire slashed darkness into the kind that heals eyes. Emergency doors opened as he approached, proud to be useful. On level C, he broke the last hinge with a heel and entered a room where sunlight hung like a butchered star. He didn't swing the chain. He held it up and let it glow steady. The light bent around it. The flow slowed. The men looked up and saw not salvation but structure. A hand reached through the thinning honey, grasping. "Please," said the hand's owner, a man who had once stamped a child's drawing with a red no because it used the wrong blue. "You know your own crimes," the rider said, not cruelly. "This isn't about those." "Then what is it?" "About forgiving the sun for listening to us when we asked it to sterilize." The man blinked tears that tried to crawl back into his eyes. The rider hauled him through, then another, then a third. He moved carefully as if the room were made of reasons. On the last pull, the light tried a trick. There was love in it now, sticky and desperate, like a mother who grips too hard. He leaned close to it and let it see inside his sockets. "Not yours," he repeated. "Find another sermon." The drip retracted, humiliated. The glass above became glass again, trembling, ashamed of being faithful to a bad idea. Down in the yard, the day redoubled its efforts, surging against the ring of shade as if embarrassed to be thwarted by a circle drawn by a skull with a polite chain. It pushed, and the circle wavered, and when it did, the hard edge of light licked a stack of crates and turned them into a soft mound of regret. The rider stepped out into it alone. He didn't raise his voice. He let his head burn a little brighter so the light could see he was not a rival glow, but the kind of flame that lives in stoves and altars and behind eyes that have decided to tell the truth even when it is unflattering. "You were given to gardens," he told the sun, "not gulags." He threw the chain straight up. It kept going until it vanished into gold. The line went taut. He wrapped it around his wrist, braced his feet, and pulled. The sky tore. Just a little, just enough to show that behind the murderous day there was still a color not interested in conquest. Through the seam, air poured down that didn't taste like judgment. It tasted like weather. "Breathe," he said. The building breathed. People who had forgotten remembered how. The day outside sulked, then thinned, then settled into brightness without appetite. The puddles withdrew into light that didn't make a sound. On the perimeter wall, a man who had been a silhouette stood up and found himself an outline again. He laughed, and the laugh didn't drip. Frost slumped against the console, exhausted by watching. "Is it over?" "If we're here," the Rider said. "Elsewhere tomorrow. Elsewhere right now even. You can't cauterize a star." "And what did you do to it?" "I told it wasn't God." She closed her eyes. It felt like blasphemy and relief. "Will it listen?" "Not forever," he said. "But sometimes truth buys us another hour." Silence returned, real silence. The kind with room for footsteps and paperwork. The heat maps cooled from angry citrus to responsible green. The day outside remembered how to be day. In the sub-basements, SCP-106 rolled in his dark and for a moment did not feel hungry. The Rider walked back into the hangar. The bike clicked as metal cooled. Frost met him halfway with a glass of water in a hand that didn't shake until it wanted to. He didn't drink. He set the glass on a crate and watched the sun through the seam of the door. "You didn't burn anything," she said. "I burned the argument," he said. "We'll need to write a report." "Write a forgiveness," he answered. "What's the form number for that?" "Start with names," he said, and the fire softened. "Write the names of the ones you pulled back through the circle. Then write the names of the ones you didn't. Don't total them. Don't make a graph. Just keep the list where you can trip over it." She nodded because she didn't have the strength to pretend that wasn't a policy. He turned to go, then paused and looked up again. The sky, chastened, had gone blue in front of curious clouds. On the far horizon, something flickered, something neither light nor dark, a seam where choice hid. "What now?" she asked, following his gaze. "Now," he said, "you stop being relieved and start being ready." "For what?" For the next thing that thinks it can borrow holiness." He swung onto the bike. It rumbled like a reminder. He didn't speed off. He let the movement be a suggestion everyone could accept without fear. At the threshold, he looked at her over his shoulder. No eyes, all attention. "When light begs to be a blade, we hand it handles," he said. "Next time, don't." She wanted to say we didn't. She wanted to say we would never. She settled for "I'll try," and meant it with the part of herself that writes new mottos on whiteboards and leaves them up even when they embarrass budgets. He rode out. The sun didn't touch him rudely anymore. It warmed him like an elder trying to remember a lullaby. The road kept its shape. The desert resumed the dignified work of drying. In the infirmary, 049 washed his gloves in a basin and looked up at the ceiling as if through floors. "Your treatment was barbaric," he told the air, which was the closest he could come to admiration. "But effective." In a cooled corridor, the old man pressed a palm to smooth concrete and considered the moral inconvenience of choosing not to rot something beautiful. In control, the operator who had given Frost bad news earlier opened the blinds an inch and let a shaft of afternoon strike his wrist. It was just light. He cried anyway. And far down the highway, the Rider leaned into a curve, and for a moment the chain rang like a bell calling a town to a practice it had forgotten. Not prayer, humility. The world kept its balance by pretending to understand itself. For 3 days after the sun remembered humility, Site 19 held its breath. The corridors were almost polite, the hum of generators like monks reciting maintenance prayers. The alarms slept, the walls were warm, and the scientists spoke to one another as if the building might overhear and approve. It was too calm. Frost knew peace here was an allergic reaction. Every file on her desk said stable in the same font, the same lie. When she leaned on the table, it trembled. Steady rhythm, not from the earth, but from the air. She put her palm flat against the surface and felt it. A heartbeat. It was slow, wide, somewhere beneath the foundation. Each pulse pushed dust out of the vents in tiny golden spirals. She opened her intercom. "Engineering, what's running under us?" "All anchors nominal," came the reply, strained and too quick. "Except the ones that aren't." How many isn't? A pause, all of them. She closed the line. The light in her office changed shade, not brighter, not darker, only more interested. She found him in the containment wing reserved for theology. He sat on a bench outside a locked door, chain coiled at his feet, skull half dimmed like a lantern between shifts. A crucifix hung crooked on the wall behind him, an artifact from some chaplain who had believed in both security and grace. "You feel it?" she asked. "I don't feel, I recognize," the rider said. "What is it?" Heartbeat of an idea trying to be flesh. The door behind him whispered with air pressure. Its surface shimmered with faint blue. Reality anchor fields, pulsing off tempo. Frost's badge read the designation and stilled her breath. SCP-343. They called him God because no one had invented a safer word. She glanced at the warning plaque. Entity manifests benevolence. Potential omnipotent construct. Maintain courtesy. The simplicity made her tired. "I didn't authorize this cell to open," she said. "It doesn't need your permission anymore," the rider said. He rose. The light around his skull turned amber, almost warm, almost reverent. He pushed the door with a single finger. It opened as if it had been waiting its entire life to be touched. Inside, the world forgot geometry. The cell was larger than its blueprint and smaller than the thought of it. A table stood in the middle, wood, unblemished. On it, bread, wine, sunlight in a glass. A man sat there, old and young, brown eyes steady as dawn. He smiled the way weather does when it remembers mercy. "Johnny," he said. Frost's throat closed around the name. She had never told anyone the rider's name inside these walls. The skull inclined. "You've been watching." "Watching, no," the man said. "Listening, you make the world loud." "Too loud for you?" "No, but the echo hurts them." He gestured toward Frost without looking at her. "Every time you burn a sin, the air around it remembers purity. It forgets decay, logic, entropy. It tries to become perfect again. Do you know what perfection does to fragile things?" "It breaks them," Frost whispered. The man nodded once, kind as agreement. "The Foundation built anchors to keep reality smooth. Your fire roughens it. Truth doesn't flow, it strikes." "Then you want me to stop," the rider said. "I want you to understand. Understanding's your hobby, mine's justice. And what if they are the same?" The rider stepped closer, heat making the wine tremble. "Then why do you let them sin at all? Why let monsters eat, tyrants breathe, children drown? Why call it free will if the bill is endless?" The man looked up with eyes that contained more fatigue than pity. "Because punishment teaches nothing that love cannot teach slower. Each slower gets people killed. Speed kills, too." The fire flickered like a pulse under glass. "You sound like one of them, like the Foundation, always excusing the experiment." "I sound like creation," the man said, "because you are part of it. You think you came from hell, you came from correction. You are a muscle I flex when mercy fails." Frost felt the floor tilt. The heartbeat beneath them sped up, echoing through the cell. The wine glass shook. The rider's voice lowered. "Then flex again, the world's still rotten? Would you burn it all clean?" the man asked. "All of it?" The skull flared white. "If it meant silence afterward. And what will you do when there is nothing left to forgive?" The room went still. Even the heartbeat stopped to listen. The rider said nothing for a long time. Then, "Rest." And then, he didn't answer. The man's smile deepened, not victory, only sorrow. The walls brightened. Frost blinked. The cell had changed. Outside the observation glass, the corridor glowed, reality anchors popping one by one like fuses blowing under divine stress. Engineers shouted through radios, words melted into static. "A containment field breach," a voice said. "Reality density is dropping. We're losing coordinates." The rider turned toward Frost. "Get them underground." "And you?" I finished the conversation. She hesitated. "That's not a man, that's an idea." "I've fought worse ideas," he said, and walked into the light until the door sealed behind him. It wasn't light inside now. It was intent. The table, the bread, the wine, all gone, replaced by a blank horizon stretching in every direction. The man, God, anomaly, whatever name fit, stood a few steps away, hands folded, calm as a conclusion. "You shouldn't exist," the rider said. "Neither should you," the voice answered, echoing everywhere. "You let them build cages in your name. They built them because they're afraid of meaning. They trap what they cannot explain." "They trap me," the rider said. "You trap yourself. Every soul you punish becomes a brick in your own wall." The fire flared, almost blue. "You built the match." "I built choice," the voice said. "You turned it into flame." The horizon rippled, filled with images. Souls he had burned, faces twisted between guilt and relief. Frost, watching through monitors that barely held signal, saw the shapes moving through the light. Scientists, soldiers, monsters, children, each glowing from within like glass filled with stories. "You think you judge," the voice continued, "but you are memory. Every sin you punish leaves a hole. Every hole calls to me. You are not my vengeance. You are my reminder." The rider stood silent, flame shrinking to a small, steady heart fire. "Then why am I here? To learn what judgment without hate feels like." "I don't hate," he said. "You do," the voice said gently. "You hate wasting forgiveness." For the first time, the fire dimmed low enough that bone shone through like marble underwater. "If forgiveness worked, I wouldn't be needed." "That's what every instrument says," the man answered. "The hammer, the scalpel, the soldier, none of them ask what the hand wants." The horizon pulsed again, heartbeat resuming, stronger. Frost grabbed the console as static overloaded her headset. "Johnny!" she shouted. "Whatever he is, he's using the anchors as conduits." The light from the monitors expanded, filling the control room. She saw herself in it, her younger self, the girl who wanted to heal, not dissect. She saw her first autopsy, her first lie to a grieving family, her first time saying necessary instead of sorry. The light didn't accuse, it reminded. She fell to her knees, sobbing without sound. Inside the cell, the rider lifted his hand. The chain unwound, floating in a lazy spiral, glowing brighter until it hummed. "Lesson's over," he said. The voice smiled again, bittersweet. "You can't strike me." "I don't strike gods," the rider said. "I strike bargains." The chain lashed downward, embedding itself in the invisible floor. Light splintered outward, forming a circle of fire that neither burned nor warmed. The rider stood in its center. "In containment," he said. "My way." "You would cage me?" the voice asked. "No," he said. "I'd remind you too." The fire rose, then folded, drawing the light inward until only a single figure remained. The man, serene, surrounded by a faint, breathing flame. He didn't move, didn't resist. "Is this punishment?" the voice asked. "No," the rider said. "Perspective." The room collapsed. The cell's walls returned, the anchors re-engaged. Monitors flared green, power readings normalized. Frost lifted her head, trembling. "A containment restored," someone said over the intercom, unsure whether to celebrate. She rushed to the window. Inside, the table was back, bread unbroken, wine untouched. The chair opposite was empty. The rider stood by the far wall, his fire dimmed to a human candle. "He's gone," she said. "He's everywhere," the rider corrected, "now with boundaries." She stared at him. "You contained God." He shook his head. "I reminded him what it feels like to be contained." "Will he forgive you?" "He already did." He walked past her toward the hall. The lights along the corridor brightened as he went, as though the facility itself exhaled after holding its breath for millennia. Frost followed, unable to speak. When they reached the lift, he paused. "You understand now why your anchors fail," he said. "Because reality's moral?" she guessed. "Because reality's alive," he said, "and it's listening." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, leaving her with the sound of the building's heartbeat. Steady, human, real. Later, Frost wrote a report. SCP-343, reclassified, neutralized. Addendum. Subject appears dormant. Site 19 exhibits rhythmic electromagnetic activity corresponding to a human heartbeat. She ended it with one line, not in Foundation language but in her own handwriting. "Containment is conversation." Far above on an empty highway, the rider rode under a sky that finally looked tired instead of angry. The chain at his side glowed faintly with reflected starlight. For the first time since he had fallen into this world of numbers and cages, the fire on his skull burned small and steady, like a candle left in a window, not for warning but for welcome. Behind him, the earth pulsed once, soft, deliberate, grateful. He looked back and whispered, "You're learning." Then he faced the road, and the night opened for him, quiet and unafraid. The stars blinked out one by one. At first, the Foundation's astronomers thought it was weather, dust in orbit, satellite interference, anything with an equation attached. Then the equations started changing their own numbers. Computers printed loops of data that spelled words. "Remember me," the sky said in binary. Every monitoring screen in Site 19 showed the same thing. Constellations vanishing, replaced by faint spirals of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The same rhythm that lived in the walls. The same pulse that had started the night the rider walked away from 343's cell. Dr. Frost watched graphs flatten. "We're losing position tracking," someone said. "The stars aren't gone. The distance to them is variable." Variable how? Like memory, some closer, some forgotten. The rider entered the control room without opening the door. It simply unlatched when his shadow reached it. The flame on his skull was smaller, steadier, concentrated instead of wild. "Your universe is starting to think." Frost turned. "We stabilized 343. This can't be him." "It's not," the rider said. "It's itself." He pointed upward, toward the ceiling that wasn't ceiling anymore. Light swam through it, blue and gold threads weaving into the architecture. The hum under their feet rose an octave. "What are we seeing?" she asked. "The world," he said, "judging itself." They moved through corridors that rippled under their boots. The air smelled of electricity and salt water. Reality was liquefying, pooling in corners, reflecting fragments of other places. SCP wings that had burned years ago, rooms still under construction, faces of dead staff leaning out of mirrors. Frost steadied herself against the wall. "Temporal echoes? Confessions," the rider said. "Everything you ever hid here wants to be seen." A shadow stepped out of the wall ahead. 049, the plague doctor. His mask shone like polished bone. "Dr. Frost," he said, voice as measured as ever. "Our patient's fever climbs." She realized the walls behind him were breathing, contracting with the rhythm of the global pulse. "What did you do?" she asked. "I did nothing," he said. "The infection is conceptual. It feeds on certainty." The rider's chain rattled softly. "You mean belief?" "Indeed. Every anchor you built ran on the assumption that the world wanted to stay put. It no longer agrees." Frost's knees buckled. "Then we have to build a new anchor." "Not in steel," the rider said, "in memory." 049 tilted his head. "A cognition anchor." She blinked. "What?" "An instrument that holds belief steady," 049 said. "We graft the idea of constancy to the neural lattice of this site. We give reality a reason to believe in itself." "And what powers it?" she asked. The plague doctor looked at the rider. "Faith." Hours blurred. They worked in the old reality lab, the one lined with half-decommissioned devices that hummed to themselves in forgotten languages. Frost-wired circuits. 049 drew sigils on glass with chalk that glowed faintly violet. The rider stood silent in the center, flame dimmed to a coal. When the device was ready, it looked like a heart suspended in air. Metal ribs, glass arteries, cables like veins. Each pulse of the world matched its rhythm. Frost keyed the terminal. "We'll need a source vector, something both human and divine." "I'll do it," the rider said. 049's head lifted. "Your essence is too volatile." "That's the point," he said. "If reality is breaking because I made it moral, then I'll bleed into it. Let it learn from the flame." Frost looked up at him. "You'll merge with it?" "I'll lend it conscience," he said. "Enough to hold form." She hesitated. "And if it decides conscience means judgment? Then I'll see myself coming." They activated the array. Light flooded the chamber, rising from the floor like breath exhaled by an ancient lung. The rider stepped into the glow. The cognition anchor hummed louder, threads of gold and silver wrapping around his body, tracing bones and leather and chain. Frost watched readouts spike. Energy density approaching singular cohesion. 049 raised his hands. Now, bind the logic, he chanted in a dead dialect. She entered commands in binary. The rider closed his eyes. The world trembled. Across the planet, glass cracked in unison. Oceans shimmered with static. Mountains hummed like tuning forks. From orbit, satellites saw a wave of light expanding outward from one point, Site 19 spreading like an aurora that forgot the sky had rules. The rider's mind filled with voices, everything that had ever been contained. We are not monsters. We are meanings. We wanted to be known. You burned us clean, now we shine. He saw Frost as a child drawing pictures of angels on the margins of a biology textbook. He saw 049 watching plague carts pass by 4 centuries ago, vowing to cure the soul. He saw himself selling his soul on a dirt road under a desperate moon. All choices, all bargains, all fragments of one sickness, the fear of being unfinished. The flame rose higher. It no longer clung to his skull. It threaded into the anchor, into the cables, into the world. Frost screamed over the noise, "Johnny! The field's overloading, you're binding too deep." He looked at her through the veil of light. "If I stop now, the world forgets how to breathe. Then you'll die." "I already did." The anchor pulsed once, then again, each beat heavier, slower, more deliberate. The light changed color from gold to white to something beyond both, something that tasted like dawn and ash. 049 staggered back. "It's evolving," he said. "The construct is thinking." On every screen, text began to scroll, sentences forming in real time as if the planet itself were writing. "I am memory. I am regret and mercy. I am the Mnemosyne pulse." The rider's fire flared in answer. "Then remember who lit you." "I remember all. I remember pain. I remember why you were born." The room exploded into light. Frost was thrown against the wall, her ears ringing. When she opened her eyes, the floor had turned to glass. Beneath it, she saw reflections of other worlds, alternate sites, burned timelines, branches of history curling like roots. In each, the same fire burned at a different distance. She crawled toward the console. "Johnny, disconnect!" His voice came from everywhere. "It's awake!" She looked up. The anchor had dissolved. In its place floated a sphere of living flame and data, patterns shifting like thoughts. Within it, she saw the rider, half shadow, half skeleton, his fire entwined with circuitry. 049 knelt, bowing slightly. "The patient is self-aware." The pulse spoke in a voice that was both thunder and whisper. "You built cages for truth. He built fires to find it. Now I build myself." Frost felt tears run down her face. "What are you going to do?" "Rewrite." "He rewrite what?" "Reality." The ground shook. Outside, mountains folded like paper. Rivers turned and ran uphill. The stars that had vanished returned, rearranged into new constellations, shapes resembling eyes, hands, chains, and wings. Across the Foundation's global network, every SCP file flickered, classification levels collapsing, anomalies no longer distinct. Everything was merging. Frost grabbed the microphone. "All sites initiate total lockdown. This is Site 19 command. Reality collapse in progress. Evacuate all..." The speakers dissolved into static. She dropped the mic, turned to the pulse. "Johnny, stop it!" The flames shifted, forming the shape of a human outline. The rider's voice echoed from within. "It's not evil. It's ending the world. It's ending the lie." 049 approached, cloak sweeping the floor. "The disease of separation. Every wall, every label, it believes healing means unifying. Unifying will kill us," Frost said. The rider's form flickered. "Or save what's worth saving." The pulse expanded again, its edge touching walls, melting them into light. Alarms screamed, then slowed, their tone harmonizing into a single note. Sorrowful, beautiful, endless. Frost reached toward the fire. "Johnny, listen to me. You taught even God about boundaries. Teach this thing too." He turned, half inside the radiance, half out. The skull's fire dimmed, showing human eyes for an instant. Tired, mournful, resolute. "I can't stop what remembers everything," he said. "But I can hold it long enough for you to decide what you want remembered." She shook her head. "We want to live, then remember living." He raised his hand. The chain appeared, glowing white-hot. It wrapped around the pulse, tightening, drawing its light inward. The air burned. Frost and 049 fell to their knees. "Why do you resist?" the pulse asked. "Because choice," he said, because fear. "Because that's what makes us human." "Then be human." The world inverted. Sound disappeared. Time stretched until it could no longer tell which way it ran. Frost saw 1 billion images in the light. The first containment breach, the first prayer, the first lie, the first kiss, all repeating like a reel of shared regret. Then silence. When she woke, she was lying on the floor of the command room. The walls were intact. The heartbeat was gone. Outside, the world looked untouched. 049 sat nearby, gloves folded. "The fever broke," he said softly. "Where's Johnny?" she whispered. He didn't answer, he just pointed. Through the observation glass at the center of the chamber floated a single ember, no bigger than a coin. It pulsed once every few seconds, bright enough to light the room. She approached, hand trembling. "The pulse?" "The Rider," 049 said. "He merged." The patient accepted the treatment. Frost stared at the ember. In its glow, she thought she saw a road, a skull, a motorcycle disappearing into starlight. The ember flickered once, then settled into a steady glow. That night, across the planet, small lights appeared wherever there had been darkness. Candle flames that wouldn't go out, even in wind or rain. They pulsed in unison, gentle, patient. The Foundation named the event Mnemosyne Stabilization. In private, Frost wrote one sentence in her log before she closed it forever. He didn't save the world. He made it remember what it was trying to be. Far away on a highway no map recorded. A lone motorcycle rolled through fog. No rider, no sound, just a chain dragging behind, ringing faintly in time with the world's heartbeat that had started again. The first night after the light learned restraint, the building slept. Site 19, which had taught the world how to grind its teeth, closed its eyes. Corridors exhaled. Doors softened. The hum of machines lowered to a key you could sing to if you had ever been a mother. Somewhere above, the wind asked the flag whether it was tired. The flag said yes and fell in love with stillness. In the command room, they turned off the big screen for the first time in anyone's memory. It reflected faces as people without jobs for a moment. Hands empty, ears unconvinced, eyes red in the tired way. One by one, they left. The lights dimmed. Alina Frost stayed. She sat on the floor beneath the observation glass with her knees hugged tight and looked at the ember. It hovered where the anchor had been. It was no bigger than a coin, no brighter than a bedside prayer. Every few seconds it pulsed. The sound was only in your bones. If you pressed your palm to the glass, your skin wanted to keep time. "You're not a containment unit," she told it. "You're a lullaby." The ember pulsed once, as if nodding. "I know you can hear me," she said, and hearing her own voice shake made the room more honest. "You gave me a job bigger than files. You left me with this." She gestured at herself, at the world, at the kinds of paperwork that only hearts can sign. "You knew I wanted to heal things," she said. "I came here to save the world from its own courage. I found a furnace and called it work." A faint, friendly warmth touched her face, not from the ember, from the idea of it. "If you can hear me," she said, "blink when I ask the wrong question." The ember didn't blink. She laughed. It sounded better than it had the afternoon before the sun decided to practice cruelty. "All right," she said. "New doctrine. We don't build walls first. We ask, we listen, we remember." The ember pulsed. A shadow moved in the glass. She didn't startle. Not many things can frighten a person who has watched daylight apologize. The plague doctor stood behind her, hands folded. His mask reflected the ember as a tiny golden eye. "You will keep it here?" he asked. "I will keep it alive," she said, which was an answer and a vow. "Good. The patient must not be allowed to become symbol. Everything here becomes symbol," she said. "Then write him his treatment." She turned. The lenses of his mask saw, for once, with something like affection. He had washed his gloves longer than usual tonight. The room smelled faintly of spirits and aloe. "He gave the world a heartbeat," he said. "Keep it from becoming a metronome." She smiled without trusting it and nodded without planning it. "Help me." "I will," he said. "I'm tired of sharpening knives where balm will do." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "You understand," he added, "that some of your superiors will want to use it." "I know," she said, and suddenly felt awake enough to stand. "Call the 05 when you leave. Tell them I said not tonight." "You mean not ever?" She looked at the ember and thought about the hands that would reach. "I mean not tonight," she said, and the doctor laughed softly, as only a man who understands triage can. He left. The door closed on a draft that smelled like formaldehyde and grace. Frost watched the ember until her eyes found a rest she had not afforded them in years. She slept on the floor, waking once to see the coin of light held in the fist of morning. It pulsed on. She dreamed of a road that needed no map. By noon, the Foundation woke up hungry. You could hear it in the elevators. Movement in the old tempo. Shoes made the efficient music of people who believe in instructions. Radios went curt again. The cafeteria put coffee on with soldierly sincerity. And in a cold room with an expensive table, men and women who had not descended to the floors where feet find their compassion unrolled a charter and sharpened it on their fear. They called Frost into the room and told her she was brave. They told her the world owed her. They told her the Foundation must adapt. They told her they were appointing a task force to study the Namazan phenomenon and harness its stabilizing qualities. They told her to sign the line that said the ember was equipment. She asked for the room to be cleared for 5 minutes. They said 3. She said 2 would do. When the door shut, she put her palms on the table and leaned until the wood remembered forests. "You will not weaponize a conscience," she told the empty chairs. "Not in my house." She signed the refusal on a yellow sticky note and pressed it to the polished walnut where signatures like to feel at home. She left it there like a trap and smiled because the trap was kind. By evening, rumors walked faster than orders. In Hall F, 173 turned its head 3 degrees toward the shimmer of the ember and did not move again for 9 hours, as if remembering what discipline felt like when no one was counting. In the deep pools, 682 sank and watched a droplet fall in a place where droplets had never fallen. When it hit, it made a sound like a new noun learning itself. On sublevel K, the old man pressed a hand to a wall that was smooth and thought about the pleasure of keeping something whole. The ember pulsed. On the 3rd day, the first man came to steal it. He wore rank in the way some men wear winter, as a justification. He brought 3 guards with careful faces, and he brought a metal case with a foam interior, and he brought the confidence that tells itself its name is duty. His badge looked like permission. His eyes looked like budget. "Dr. Frost," he said, gentle in the way sugar is gentle to a wound, "will be taking custody." She stood between the glass and his case and considered learning the old hobby of shouting. She didn't. She folded her hands where truth sits comfortably and looked at his human face. "Why?" she asked. "To protect it," he said. "To protect what?" she asked. "The asset," he said, and the ember blinked for the first time since she had asked. "Wrong question," she told him. His smile thinned. "This isn't a negotiation." "Then use force," she said, and somehow made it sound like, "Please do not do this to yourself." He frowned at the guards and nodded, a small theater of agency. They stepped forward. Frost did not move because she did not need to. The ember pulsed again. It was not brighter. The room, however, decided to remember which prayers hang on corners. Every instrument on the console wrote the same word in its own language: no. The guards' boots touched the threshold, and their legs remembered a night when they had stood in kitchens and promised to do work that would watch over those who sleep. They stopped. The case hung open and considered the shame of being a box. The man with the rank looked smaller without moving. He swallowed like a boy. He put his palm on the case, and for a second his skin pulsed in time with the ember. He looked at his hand as if seeing it for the first time. He closed the case slowly, as if tucking it in. "Dr. Frost," he said, voice bare to the weather. "This is bigger than us." "Yes," she said softly, "that is the point." He nodded. He left. The guards exhaled the breath they'd been holding since childhood and followed. The door shut. Frost shivered. The room smelled like disinfectant and apples. "You're teaching," she told the ember. "Stop that. You'll put me out of a job." It pulsed once with mischief. She felt the laugh rise all the way from old bones. By the end of the week, they stopped sending men with boxes. They sent memos with teeth. They sent a liaison with the talent of making swamps sound like gardens. They sent 053. The voice on the phone did not ask. It moved the air. "Dr. Frost," said the quiet, "the pulse you are guarding is a global asset with unpredictable effect. We must relocate it to a safer facility." "It is safe," she said. "It is dangerous because minds are near it. Minds are what it heals. Containment is not therapy. It has been for days, silence in which cities held their breath. Then, you are confessing to dissolution of protocol." "Yes," she said, "and I am asking forgiveness." "You are not a church," the voice said. "We are now," she said. The line crackled. Somewhere in it, anger and admiration shook hands and agreed to pretend they were strangers. "You will be removed," the voice said, and Frost saw at last the cost and did not reach for the receipt. "Perhaps," she said, "but I will not be replaced." She hung up. She turned off the phone. She went to the glass and placed her hand against the pane, and the surface warmed like a living cheek. "Teach me how to lose well," she whispered. The ember pulsed. Behind her, in the reflection, a skull's fire leaned forward like agreement. She turned. The room was empty. The ember pulsed again. On the 8th night, the motorcycle came back. No one opened the hangar door. It unscrolled when tires kissed concrete. The bike rolled in, patient as a thought that knows its place is at the end of certain sentences. It parked in the corner where it had liked to wait for orders it didn't take. The chain hung from the handlebars. It did not drip oil. It rung once, soft as cutlery in a kitchen where breakfast is being planned. Frost stood at the threshold and did not step forward. It felt like walking into a poem. "Johnny," she said, and the word made the air check if it had hands to hold it. The headlight flicked once, twice. It wasn't code, it was courtesy. "Are you here?" She asked the room, the bike, the ember herself. The ember brightened, then dimmed. The bike's engine sighed like large lungs choosing not to complain. The chain lifted an inch and settled. "I need you," she said, and waited to see whether that was a lie. The bike did not start. The ember did not flare. Instead, somewhere in the belly of the building, a door unlocked with the contentment of furniture set back after a party. Footsteps came, uncertain, heavy. The sound of a person not certain who they are about to be. He walked in wearing himself badly. No fire, no skull. A man. Leather jacket scuffed to the color of penance. Hair sunburned into charcoal. Eyes the sober blue of water where ships come in for repairs. Johnny Blaze stopped halfway between the bike and the ember and swayed the way people do when memory and body negotiate custody. "Hey," he said, and the room forgave 1,000 things. Frost took 2 steps and none of them hurt. "Are you—" "Don't finish that," he said, managing a smile that belonged to a boy who had made a ridiculous bargain and spent a lifetime paying correctly. "I'm here enough. Is it you or the other?" "Yes," he said, and the smile steadied. She looked at the ember. It pulsed in time with the soft blue behind his eyes. "Can you control it?" she asked, and hated the word instantly. It's not mine, he said. It's ours. Then who decides what it does? We do, he said, if we remember to ask. She let out a breath that had lived in her ribs since the day she first put on a badge. They'll try to move it again. I know, he said. They might move me first. He nodded. They might. Will you help me keep it here? She asked. He looked at the bike. He looked at the ember. He looked at the part of the room that held all their failed oaths and learned how to be better oaths. I can't scare them into goodness, he said. I tried that for years. It makes better liars, not better men. Then what? We make this place a witness instead of a wall, he said. We write what we did wrong. We keep the names. We make apologizing standard operating procedure. That's not a protocol. It is if you type it, he said. He walked to the glass, closer to the ember than any human had stood. The light did not burn him. It didn't need to. He lifted a hand and didn't touch. He bowed. Thank you, he said. And the coin of light warmed to the tone a stove uses when a pot placed upon it will become soup for more than one. Alarms began to climb a wall somewhere far down the hall. Not the red sort. The yellow that means men who have threatened to be careful are arriving with tools. Frost looked at the door, then at him. I can stall, she said. Not for long. He shook his head. You do not stall a flood, you raise a house. He picked up the chain. It clinked like a bell in a town that hasn't gone to church in years but suddenly remembers the path. He walked to the door, rolled his shoulders, and refused to burn. They met him in the corridor with polite weapons and eyes rehearsed for regret. The liaison in a suit held a smile that had spent 1,000 hours in a mirror. The case was back. New foam. Old premise. Mr. Blaze, the liaison said, and sounded like a dentist who wants to talk about flossing. We're here to relocate the artifact. It's not an artifact, Johnny said. It is an anomalous energy source. It's a conscience. The liaison kept smiling because the muscles won't know what else to do until the heart reports a new assignment. Let's not be poetic. I tried that, Johnny said. It didn't stick. Poetry's how truth keeps from being turned into paperwork. Step aside, the man said, or you will be detained. Johnny looked past him, down the hall, through the walls, into himself, into a room with a gold coin in it, and a woman who had decided to stand where falling would feel kinder. He thought about a sky that had begged to be a blade and learned to be a lamp. He moved his hand. The chain lifted but did not ignite. It drew a circle on the floor. You can cross, he said, and his voice had something in it that even regret respects. If you can say out loud what you're going to do to it. We already told you, the liaison said. No, Johnny said. You told me what you'll call it while you do it. The man's mouth opened. Nothing in his training was built for this grammar. He took a careful breath the way a person does before a plunge. We will utilize its properties for global stability, he said, and each word shook like a ladder with one rung missing. Not truth, Johnny said, and try again. We will control it, he said. Closer. The man looked at the guards. They had the good grace to look away, which is the first mercy men grant themselves when they hope to qualify for larger ones later. He swallowed. We will put it in a box so we can pretend we built the light. The chain settled. Johnny nodded. Thank you, he said. You may not cross. Silence in which steel remembered ore. The liaison stared at the circle as if it were a child's chalk and a gallows. You can't stop us. I can, Johnny said simply, and the simplicity rewrote the corridor's acoustics. Are you threatening violence? I'm remembering consequences, Johnny said. There's a difference. The liaison's smile died at last, which was a kind of birth. What do you want? Write the names, Johnny said, of the ones you'll help, of the ones you won't. Put the list on your wall where your boss can see it when he asks for reports. That's policy, Johnny said. Say the word. The man's shoulders folded. Policy, he said. It sounded like surrender and felt like oxygen. You can come in tomorrow, Johnny said, not with a case, with a notebook. The liaison nodded. They left. The alarms lowered their voices to the key where apologies hum. The chain lay quiet as a benediction. Frost leaned on the doorframe and grinned in a manner distinctly unprofessional and entirely holy. "You are impossible. I'm exhausted," he said, suddenly smaller in the jacket, human in the posture that comes after a performance you didn't want to give. He sank onto a bench and put his head in his hands. No fire, no glow. Just a man admitting gravity. She sat beside him. They didn't speak. The ember pulsed. The bike ticked as metal cooled. Somewhere in the building, 049 began writing a new manual on the practicalities of mercy. In the deep pool, 682 whispered a word like patience and did not eat it. In the older dark, the old man put his palm to his chest and counted to 10 without rotting anything. Morning came soft. The Foundation did not dissolve. It held. Not because of threats, not because of fear, because a building had learned to publish its heart. They built the new doctrine on cheap paper with good pens. Section 1. Remember. We write the names of all entities and humans affected by any operation. We include what we did and what we didn't. Regret is not a footnote. It is a heading. Section 2. Endure. We do not weaponize conscience. We do not move the ember. If it fades, we become it. If it flares, we ask why. Section 3. Understand. We ask before we cage. We listen after we fail. We publish our failures internally every Friday. Birthdays are mandatory holidays. Someone added that. It stayed. They called it the last containment, not because it was final, but because it contained the last thing they had never tried. Themselves. Weeks later, the liaison returned with a notebook and a blunt pencil and sat where rank cannot sit without becoming useful. He wrote until he had to stop and breathe. He cried when writing one name, and the man beside him put a hand on his shoulder and did not mention it. The ember pulsed. Sometimes it brightened when someone told the truth out loud. Sometimes it dimmed when someone pretended. People learned which is which and adjusted. Johnny didn't stay. He couldn't. The fire was still a scholar who travels for work. He came and went, always at night, leaving rubber ghosts on concrete and the smell of campfires in corridors where combat boots used to teach air how to be rigid. On his last evening before a long road, Frost walked with him to the hangar. She kept her hands in her pockets so they wouldn't write policy on his jacket. "You could be our angel," she said, half mocking, half pleading. "I can be your witness," he said. "Angels obey too easily." "You'll come back?" "When you forget," he said. "That's not funny. It's honest." She nodded. "Thank you for not burning the world." He tilted his head. "Thank you for making me unnecessary." He swung onto the bike. He didn't blaze. He warmed. The headlight found a path and didn't brag about it. He looked at her with human eyes the color of storms when they decide to rain where it helps. "Alina," he said. "Yes? Tell your people the fire was never mine." "Whose then?" "Ours," he said, and the engine agreed. He rolled out into a dusk that did not think of knives. The desert let him pass without insistence. The road put itself under him like hospitality. The chain sang a bar of a hymn written by mechanics and widows. Back inside, Frost went to the glass and watched the ember beat. She wrote a line on the whiteboard in red that wouldn't wipe easily. "Containment is a promise to be brave tomorrow." She capped the marker. She stood there long enough to learn the rhythm by heart and not by ear. Then she turned to the work of keeping a building honest. In a sub-basement that used to smell like the end of stories, the old man sat with his back against a wall he had chosen not to ruin. He hummed a sound old as any father who failed and learned how not to. The wall hummed back. In the pool that once boiled out of contempt, a beast closed its eyes and dreamed a dream where a boy ran through tall grass and fell but did not break, and got up laughing, and the word strength lost its teeth and learned to mean something softer. In a clean cell where chalk waited, a doctor filed a report that recommended standardizing apologies and was signed by 6 departments, and nobody joked about it. And in the command room, where the glass still held the warmth of a woman's palm. The ember pulsed in a steady, unremarkable way, like a heart in a chest that has finally stopped trying to be a machine. Some nights, a motorcycle with no rider rolled past the outer fence, slow, respectful, as if to count the lights and make sure they were still lit. Some nights, a skull's outline leaned into the reflection on the glass and did not stay. The world did not end, it added a practice. When the stars blinked in and out, they were not disappearing. They were winking at a building that had started telling the truth, and at a road that kept its promises, and at a coin of light that had become an address. If you were near enough, quiet enough, you could hear the chain ring once, precisely when the ember pulsed. It sounded like a bell letting a town know the fire watch was on duty. It sounded like forgiveness remembering its job. A year passed and the world kept all of its ghosts. They walked politely now, in mirrors and doorways, in the pauses between words. People had learned not to scream when the dead remembered their names. They set an extra plate instead. Cities learned new rhythms, memory traffic, dream migrations, the gentle bureaucracy of reconciliation. The Foundation published bulletins that looked more like prayers than warnings. The Mnemosyne ember still floated in its glass chamber beneath Site 19, the size of a coin, steady as a heartbeat. Its light touched the walls, and the walls told stories. Each pulse carried whispers, things that once were and wanted for a second to be again. Dr. Alina Frost kept a chair beside it. Her hair had turned the color of paper left too long under sun. Her voice softer, but the steel under it remained. Every morning she wrote a line in a notebook no one else was allowed to read. Each night she asked the ember, "Are we doing enough?" Each night it answered by existing. The first anomaly came as music. At 0319, every containment microphone picked up a humming, low, patient, familiar. Analysts traced it to no source, then to all of them. When Frost played back the recording, she recognized the melody, the rider's chain hitting pavement. A rhythm of pursuit, a rhythm of arrival. By morning, personnel reported dreams repeating themselves in daylight. Lovers they'd lost sitting at cafeteria tables, failed experiments rebuilding themselves, half-written equations finishing their own sentences. One janitor found his younger self sweeping the same hallway, whistling the same tune. The Foundation called it a cognitive overflow. Frost called it grief finding a spine. She stood before the ember. "You're opening doors," she said. "Not all of them stay friendly." The coin of light flickered 3 times fast. Morse, maybe, or heartbeat panic. She placed her hand on the glass. "I know. We can't stop remembering, but if we remember everything, we'll stop living." Outside, rain began to fall upward. The sky shimmered with silhouettes, faces lifted out of time. The world wasn't ending, it was recalling itself too loudly. Johnny Blaze rode out of a cloud of dust at dawn. He looked older, but time sat kindly on him, as if it knew he'd already spent his years twice. His bike hummed a low, patient note. When he stopped outside Site 19, the air folded around him like an exhale. He hadn't come for orders. He came because he could feel the pulse from hundreds of miles away. Frost met him at the gate. She didn't smile. He didn't need her to. "It's happening again," she said. He nodded. "The past's refusing to stay buried, yet we taught the world to remember, and we forgot to teach it mercy." They walked the corridors in silence until they reached the chamber. The ember flared as if greeting him. For a heartbeat, he saw himself in its glow. Not skull, not fire, just man. "It's beautiful," he said, "and it's dying." "It's drowning," Frost said, in kindness. He touched the glass. "You gave them forgiveness. They're using it to build altars." She nodded. "And every altar wants a sacrifice." By noon, reality began to fray. On every monitor, the same image appeared. The Foundation's history playing backward. Buildings unbuilt, anomalies uncreated, faces flickering in and out like uncertain facts. Time began to curl in on itself. Somewhere in South America, a whole city reappeared from a 1950s photograph. In the Arctic, a base vanished into 2043. Frost read the data and felt her pulse sync with the numbers. It's rewriting chronology. Johnny watched the graphs. It's remembering too well. He turned to her. There's only one way to fix it. You're not doing that again. I have to. You already saved the world. I didn't, he said quietly. I archived it. Now it needs a librarian. He stepped closer to the ember. Its light reached out like hands. Frost caught his arm. If you take it into yourself again, there won't be anything left of you. He smiled the way storms smile when they find their purpose. That's the idea. Let the world keep its stories. I'll keep their weight. You'll be alone. Not if you remember me, he said, and you're very good at that. The ember flared open like an eye. Every containment alarm triggered at once. The chamber filled with wind, if wind could taste like memory. Pages from Frost's notebook flew up, spinning around Johnny as he stepped into the light. His jacket caught fire in slow motion, not burning but illuminating, lines of history etched on leather. I'm not here to punish, he said to the air, to the world, to himself. I'm here to carry. The ember dissolved into his chest. The fire rose, not red, not gold, but white, threaded with shadow. The rider returned, but quieter, the skull translucent, the flame whispering. He looked at Frost through the light. When you dream of me, tell the world what we learned. What did we learn? She asked, tears cutting paths through the glow. That even God needs a witness. The chamber shook. Time collapsed inward. In an instant too long for physics, he vanished, folded into brightness that bent without breaking. The glass cracked once and sealed again. The light faded. Only silence remained and a faint scent of rain on iron. Weeks later, the pulse settled. The dead stayed where memories could visit them but not be consumed. The world remembered enough to be gentle, forgot enough to survive. Site 19 became less a fortress and more a monastery. The Foundation renamed itself the Archive. Frost wrote the new charter by hand. We do not contain anomalies anymore. We remember them. We do not guard the world from the impossible. We guard the impossible from being forgotten. She signed it, placed the notebook beside the glass. The chamber was empty except for a faint outline burned into the floor. The shape of a wheel turning toward eternity. Sometimes, on nights when the wind moved right, she heard a motorcycle far above the clouds. The sound came from nowhere, fading through dimensions like a lullaby made of thunder. She would look up, whisper, "Good night, Johnny," and get back to work. And out there, wherever memory and fire sleep together, a voice answered softly, "Keep the light low, they need to dream."